go.
Yes!
Throw me like a stone in the water, watch the mud rise up. Dress me like a lamb for the slaughter, pour me in your cup. Should've known we'd bring trouble, trouble gonna find you here. Trouble. Trouble. Trouble.
Well, good morning and welcome to Sunnyside, where we are people following Jesus. To those not yet, man, it's good to be here with you guys today and for you to be with us, whether you're here in person or online. We're glad that you all made the decision to show up and join us today. We are going to be talking about following a lot today, but I got a confession to make first of all. I need you all to know that I follow sports. All right, I follow sports. Anybody else in here is like a sport follower? Okay, in particular, I follow college basketball. More specifically than that, I follow March Madness. And being a Kentucky Wildcat fan, I'm kind of praying for a global pandemic to hit before tomorrow night's game because I don't want either one of these teams to win, all right? Joking aside, I love sports, and probably more so than I should. You could ask my family. I get engaged in a game. I watch a game, and like if my team loses, I get upset. Like it affects my psyche. Like I'm no good the rest of the day. Sometimes it's just bad news, right? But being a follower of sports, oftentimes I kind of attune my ears to the people that know the things that I want to know. And so I find myself following different teams. I find myself following different coaches, following different analysts. You know, I listen to guys like Scott Van Pelt or Stephen A. Smith. And even though sometimes I disagree with them, I tune my ears to them. I listen to them. I respect what they have to say. You could say that I follow them. Like I hear what they have to say, and what they have to say actually influences the things that I think. It affects the opinions that I have on certain topics. Sometimes it creates awarenesses of things that I didn't even know that I even cared about because I'm listening to these guys. It even affects the way that I choose my brackets, you know, which I probably shouldn't have listened to anybody this year because it was all just terrible, right? But if I was a betting man, and I'm not really a betting man, it would affect the way in which I bet on teams because I can't help but be influenced by the people and the things that I listen to and I hear. And so I would listen to them, I'd be influenced them at just how it is for me. Now, a quick sidebar soapbox just on this note for a moment, because this is something I want to make sure that you're at least having somebody else speak into you about, because it's easy for us to be normalized by certain things in our culture. But have any of you guys seen the amount of sport betting commercials that have been out these days? Have you all seen this? Okay, so just a heads up here, if there are organizations that are willing to cover up to $3,000 of a loss on your behalf, you probably ought to be wary of these things, okay? Now, I'm all for fun and for entertainment and making a friendly wager here and there, but seriously, for those of you all that don't know this and have not had anybody else speaking to you in this particular situation, betting, specifically gambling, is incredibly addictive. And it can be very damaging. I've personally known people in my life and in my ministry who it's greatly affected their lives and it's affected their relationships. And so don't see this as being just kind of normalized by culture and therefore okay to engage. You need to approach those things with a great amount of caution and wisdom as you approach those things. And if you happen to win big, don't forget to tithe. Okay. Just throw that in there. All right. So maybe sports is not your thing, all right? Maybe sports is not your thing, but it seems like everyone's following somebody these days, right? Everyone's following somebody these days. We even use that terminology in things like podcasts. Right? How many of you guys listen to podcasts, all right? Raise your hand. Anybody follow Instagram? Somebody on Instagram? TikTok, this is for the younger generations, I get it. YouTube, we got people that would follow. Talk radio shows. News networks, all right, I'm getting to some of you all. I understand my dad is a follower of certain news networks, and he hears certain things, and it affects the way in which he believes and thinks and speaks. Like I can directly hear some of the influence coming from the people that I know that he listens to. As a matter of fact, if you and I sat down and you told me some of the influences in your life, some of the people that you follow, I'd have a pretty good idea of what it is that you believe or how you live your life. And not exactly, right? But here's the deal. You can't help but be influenced by those that you follow. Everyone is a follower of something, and you can't help but be influenced by those you follow. Now, those of us who have kids, we are parents, or maybe you think back to when you were a kid, you probably heard something of this nature, right? Be careful the company you keep. Anybody hear that phrase? Or maybe more specifically, hey, you need to be careful of who you hang out with, who your friends are. And as parents, we understand this. This is very, very important that who our kids hang out with, we don't want just like that to happen willy-nilly. We kind of evaluate them. We check them out. Are they the type of people that have the kind of character? And why is that? Why do we care so much about who our kids hang out with? Because we know that the people that they hang out with are going to influence them. You can't help but be influenced by the people that you hang out with. And that's just on the side of friendship. In a friendship, typically you have the ability to influence somebody, right? And them influence you to be led and to lead others. But these days, literally, quite figuratively, our kids and we ourselves, we are putting ourselves under somebody else and we follow them. Oftentimes without having any kind of direct correlation or connection to them. We might not have had any kind of proximity or meeting with them, and so they are only influencing us. And so it would be really wise of us as parents and individuals to really evaluate and figure out who are the people that my kids are actually being influenced by. Who are they following, and what is it they believe? What are they about? What are they communicating and teaching? Because who you follow determines who you become. I want you to say this with me. Who you follow determines who you become. I think that at the root of this, we believe that this is true. We've seen this be true. We understand that there's some variations that happen within this, but ultimately, who you follow it determines who you become. It determines the trajectory of your life. That's why we're so conscientious of the influences and the company that we keep. Now, you know who understood this very phrase and understood this about us? Jesus, all right? He understood this very well when he uttered the invitation on multiple occasions throughout the Gospels. Come, what? Follow me. He wants to put his name in the mix for people to be able to follow. He says, hey guys, with everybody else that you all have to follow out there, I want to be a person. As a matter of fact, I want to be the person that I want you to follow. It was a very common thing in Jewish culture for a rabbi to utter these words, come follow me, to a student. And so here's what I want us to do this morning as we're preparing for this Following Jesus series. If we understand what it really looks like to follow Jesus these days, I think we need to take a look at what it actually meant to follow Jesus in his day. You know, it's a really good practice as we study the scriptures to actually go back to historical context of a verse or a saying so as to have a better understanding of what it actually meant when it was first uttered. Because a good hermeneutical practice is that a passage could never mean what it never meant. In other words, you need to find out what Jesus was actually calling people to do when he said follow him in order for us to better understand how we can follow him these days. So let's do a little bit of historical context on this. What did it mean for a person to follow a rabbi in the days of Jesus? The word that oftentimes you'll hear, and you'll actually see this pop up in the scriptures as well, Jesus refers to this as well. He says, take on my yoke, right? The idea of a yoke would be my teachings, the things that I'm passing along to you, I want you to have on yourself so that you can perpetuate these into the next level. And so what would happen is in the Jewish culture, all kids, specifically boys, would start off with some basic learning principles, and they would get their reading and the writing out of the way really early on, and then they would start a series of schools, not unlike what we have set up in our Americanized culture with elementary and middle and high school, and then you have higher education, college degrees and stuff like that. However, for us, education is something that's universal. Anybody who wants to do this is actually encouraged to do it. In the Jewish culture, though, it was actually kind of limited. You'd have these different schools, but you would only go to school as much as you could cut it. And then if you weren't smart enough or educated enough or kind of the best of the best, then you would actually kind of stop school and start something else along the ways. And so I'm not going to bore you too much with all this different division, but I find this really fascinating. So these kids would start off with a school called Bet Sefer. And this is the house of the book. And so basically from age 6 to age 10, they would devote themselves, now that they knew how to read, to reading what they knew as their Bible in that day, which is the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. And not only reading the first 5 books, they would commit to memorizing the first 5 books of the Bible. Now, I've got some kids that are in that age range, and I can't even get them to memorize a scripture verse, never mind 5 books of the Bible, right? But 6 to 10, around those ages, they would be memorizing these first 5 books. It was so important to them in their culture that that's what they would do. And so what would happen is after that period of time, only the best would actually continue on to the next level. If they seemed like they had some promise, they would actually move into this next level of school, which would be the Bet Talmud. Okay, this is the house of learning. The best students would then continue on in their learnings, and they would learn more about the beliefs of their culture and their people. They would learn their history. They would learn some law. And this would be like from age 10 to 14. Some of these ages vary a little bit. Okay, but this is basically kind of that middle range. And they would continue to study and continue to learn and continue to kind of rise. It's a very competitive thing, right? Because at some point in time, they would either figure out that they're good enough to move on or they're not good enough and they need to go figure something else out. Well, at the end of this particular schooling, the best of the best, the cream of the crop would start to rise to the very highest level. And so the best of the best they would actually apply to this next level of school. But it wasn't an institution like a college that we know of. The next level of schooling would actually be to study directly to mentor under a rabbi of the day. This was called Bet Midrash. It was the house of study. And so the best students would basically apply to study under this rabbi, and to which the rabbi would evaluate them. They go through this intense process. They would ask questions. They would see what their thinking was and how that they processed and what their knowledge was. They were checking their qualifications, if you will. And after this kind of extended period of observation and evaluation, the rabbi had it upon himself to make a determination as to whether or not he would accept them or send them on, whether they would be the type of people that could carry on his yoke to the next generation to be able to pass that along. And so ultimately, after this period of evaluation, there'd be 2 responses that would happen. Okay, the first response would be the rabbi would look to the student and he would say this: go home, have children, and pray that they may become a rabbi. Go home and ply your trade. Now, this is a nice formal way of saying you're not smart enough, all right? So go home and pray that your kids can be smarter than you. And while you're at it, go ahead and learn your family's business because you're going to need it, all right? That's kind of what the rabbi would say at this point in time, okay? This is a nice way. So go home, ply your trade, learn your family's business. And so you all need to know that this was the case with the large majority of the people of the day. They wouldn't make the cut. They were not qualified. They were not chosen by the rabbi. However, to a very select few, people who that rabbi saw something in, saw somebody who could take what he believed in his instruction and be able to not only absorb it, but they also be able to pass it along, he would utter these words. He would say, "Come, follow me." In the Hebrew, lek akarai. Come, follow me. And to those privileged students, a blessing would be passed on to them. And this blessing would be this: may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. May you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. Come follow me. May you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. This particular blessing is thought to come from the Mishnah, which is a collection of rabbinic thoughts. And this particular one comes from this one. It says, "Let thy house be a meeting house for the wise, and powder thyself in the dust of their feet, and drink their words with thirstiness." In other words, what this is saying is be eager to learn from these teachers, from these rabbis. Invite them into your space. Invite them into your house. Invite them into your life. Sit at their feet and learn as much as you possibly can from these teachers. The idea of this is echoed throughout the New Testament. We see Paul saying a very similar thing about who he studied under, which was this guy named Gamaliel, who was highly respected and revered. He was a great rabbi that people really loved and admired. And Paul was one of those that was chosen by him, and he got to sit at the feet of Gamaliel. He got to study under the rabbi. Right? Later on in Luke 10, we see a reference to the same thing. Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus. Much in the same way that in that culture would have been symbolic of, I'm listening to you, I'm hearing you, I want to be so close to you that I'm listening and learning from you. But it meant so much more than just being able to be available whenever the rabbi had something to teach formally or something to say. It had much more to do than just sitting and listening. It was not just about observation and about learning. It was also about proximity. It was about movements. May you follow so closely that the dust that the rabbi kicks up powders your face. In the Mishnah, when it uses that word powder, it's the same kind of concept of a woman powdering her face. In other words, I want you to be so close to the teacher that as he's walking along from town to town, as he's going to village, to synagogue, you are so close that the dust that's coming off the back of his sandals is actually landing on you, on your face, and on your body. You are powdered in the dust of your rabbi because you're following him that closely. You allow the dust to settle on you, and therefore his wisdom and his knowledge and his instruction to pass along to you. See, walking in your teacher's dust is learning from and being influenced by your teacher because you are right there with him, hearing what he says, seeing what he does, understanding how he interprets. You see every aspect of what's going on because you're in proximity to your teacher. And now, what you need to understand is to be able to receive that particular calling, to be one of the students that is actually called to come follow a rabbi, means that person needed to leave everything else aside. They needed to put all other pursuits on hold because this was the most important thing. As a matter of fact, following your rabbi became priority number one outside of your pursuit of God himself. This was what it looked like to follow a rabbi in Jesus' day. Following him, learning from, and then being able to know so much about him and what he taught and the yoke that he carried that you would actually be able to replicate that yourself, following in his footsteps, doing what you see him do. You would be covered in his dust and pass along that dust to future generations. That's what it looked like to follow a rabbi in Jesus' day. So let me take you back to Jesus. Let me take you back to an interaction because on multiple occasions you see Jesus actually uttering those words, lek, akarai, come, follow me. And I want to take you to one specific situation where we see that happening in Matthew chapter 4. So if you got your Bibles, go ahead and open them up, turn them on. You can see those on your tables as well, and it'll be up here on the screen. But let me walk you through this. Because Jesus one day, it says he was walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee. He's just beginning his ministry, if you will, his teaching, his rabbinic ministry. And he saw two brothers, Simon, also called Peter, and Andrew. They were throwing a net into the water, for they fished for a living. Now, let's stop real quick, reading this passage with what we just understood about the Jewish culture. Why would they be throwing a net in the water at this point in their life? Because they were fishermen, right? Being a fisherman, what did that mean for them? It meant that they're plying their father's trade. They were one of those that were rejected. They were not qualified. They didn't make the cut. They weren't smart enough. These were guys that were rejected. We don't know at what point they were rejected, but they didn't get an invitation to follow after a rabbi. We don't know how many times that they applied or how many rabbis they went to, but they didn't make the cut, guys. They were fishing for a living. They'd given up on this idea of following after a rabbi in his footsteps when all of a sudden Jesus sees them. Jesus called out to them, "Come, follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people. Guys, you need to understand that this is the same exact phrase that these young Jewish boys would have heard from a rabbi when they were accepted, when they were received, when they were chosen. Jesus is uttering the same thing to these fishermen. Come, follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people. The God of illustrations is Jesus. He's helping them understand what you've learned and the things that you've acquired. I'm going to help to make that a kingdom priority. So come just as you are, and I'm going to show you how to do that for men. And then he continues on. He says, and they left their nets at once, and they followed him. Why? Because they had been rejected, and now they had been received. They had been unqualified, and now they had been chosen. Now, a little further up the shore, he saw two other brothers, James and John, sitting in a boat with their father Zebedee, repairing their nets. What does this tell us about these guys? They're in the same boat, no pun intended, all right? Right? They're in the same boat as Simon and Andrew. They were not chosen. They were disqualified. They were rejected by the rabbis. And Jesus called them to come too. Same calling. And they immediately followed him, leaving behind the boat and their father. Now, I love this story and I love this calling, but you need to understand that my Americanized mind and interpretation is bothered by this story. I don't know if this story has ever bothered you before, but I look at this story and I see Jesus calling these guys, and I get this, but my Americanized version of my understanding of this goes, well, hold up, what about their responsibility? Right? I mean, they've got their family to be able to take care of. Well, what about the respect of their father? They abandoned him. They just up and left him. What about their stuff? Like, they got boats and nets and supplies. Like, don't they need to be responsible and go sell them or at least pass them on to somebody else before they decide to follow after Jesus? And all these questions start floating through my mind because that's the Americanized version of this. But when we put this in the Jewish context, it makes a ton of sense. These people who were unqualified and rejected had now been chosen and received. You know, I absolutely love the Chosen series as a whole, but I love the way that the Chosen series actually depicts this particular scene with James and John with their father Zebedee right there in the midst. I want you to watch this.
Lift up your head, fisherman.
What do you want from me? Anything you ask, I will do.
Follow me.
I will.
Rabbi.
You as well. Yes, you, James and John. Come, follow me.
I'll take the fish into market and settle up Simon's debt. I'll get some help to fill both of these boats. Are you sure? Yes, go. What will you tell Ima? We've just been called by the man we prayed for our entire lives. And you ask me, what will I say when you miss supper? Go, now.
I love that scene. I absolutely love it because a father's pride is welling up. He's lost his two best employees, right? But they've been called and honored to be able to follow after a rabbi. That was one of the highest callings that they could have in that day. And in this particular case, it wasn't just any rabbi. They were received and called by the Messiah. So they immediately left. I love that terminology that the scripture paints for us. They immediately left and they started to allow the dust of Jesus to settle on them as they kept in step with the Son of God. And they started to do that, and they learned how to do that, and they kind of failed at it on several different occasions, but they kept in step. They kept allowing the dust of Jesus to settle on them. They continued to learn. They continued to watch. They continued to see what he did, and it affected their lives and who they were. It affected the trajectory of their lives. It determined who they became. So much so that we see later on in Acts, these guys, Jesus has already ascended. He's already done his saving work, and he's empowered these disciples. And two of those guys that we just saw there, Peter and John, are kind of having some conversations with other people. And this is what the other people see. The members of the council were amazed when they saw the boldness of Peter and John, for they could see that they were ordinary men with no special training in the Scriptures. That hadn't changed, all right? They were still ordinary Joes. No great qualifications to the back of their name, right? And so they weren't impressed by what they knew. What were they impressed by? They also recognized them as men who had been with Jesus. They're not amazed at their credentials, but at their companionship that they kept. Not how much they knew, but who they had been with, who they had been in proximity to. Because when you're in proximity to Jesus, and you hang out with Jesus, and you follow Jesus, and you get to know him, and you see what he's done, and you read the Scriptures, and you understand those kind of things, you can't help but be changed. You can't help but start to emulate and replicate who he is in your own life. And guess what? When you start to do that, other people start to take notice that you have been with Jesus. They had been with Jesus. They had walked with Jesus. They had talked with Jesus. They had sat at his feet. They had followed in his footsteps. They probably smelled like Jesus because they went where he went. They ate what he ate. They did what he did. You could say that they were covered in the dust of their rabbi, Jesus. These uneducated and rejected group of ragtags got a front row seat. No, scratch that. A front row invitation, because it wasn't something meant to just sit down. It was meant to actually follow, to come after, to be able to be in the dust of the rabbi. You could say that they did such a good job of following Jesus, carrying his yoke of grace to all of the people they came to, that those of us who call ourselves follower of Jesus today are so because the dust of their rabbi 2,000 years ago is still being passed on you and I today. That's how well they followed Jesus. That we actually, many of us that are sitting in this room, are following Jesus today because they carried it on. They emulated him so well that we actually know what it looks like to follow Jesus today. 4 became 12, and that 12 became 72, and the invitation to come follow me is still being asked of Jesus to people like you and like me today. Seemingly insignificant, unqualified, overlooked individuals in our society that Jesus happens to see and who he desperately desires to be his disciples. Now, that's a word we've not used much today, and we actually don't use a whole lot in our language because disciples sometimes implies certain things to other people, or sometimes it's a little bit too religious, but what it really means is being a student. Or here at Sunnyside, the way that we say being a disciple is a follower of Jesus. We're given a little bit more context to that. Someone who wants to be what his teacher is. Someone who wants to be what his rabbi is. That's what we are as followers of Jesus. We want to be what our Savior, Jesus, is. To walk where he walks, to do what he does, to teach what he teaches, to say what he says, to interpret things the way he tells us to interpret. That's what we ultimately want to be. And I want you to catch this. In their day, when Jesus was making these calls, few were chosen to follow after a rabbi based on their qualifications, based on what they could offer, based on what their credentials were, right? Very few were chosen, but Jesus flips the script. He says, none are qualified, but I'm choosing you all. All are welcome to follow me. Anyone who would come after me, I'm giving you free rein. You don't have to be qualified on the front end. I will qualify you. Matter of fact, in John 15, he says, you didn't choose me. I chose you. Amen. You're chosen. And that's not some kind of a statement of predestination, a theological construct. I think it's a statement for us to be able to understand that he moved first. He initiated. It wasn't because of who we are or what we've become already or what we've done in the past that would disqualify us or qualify us. It's because he saw something in each one of us. And he says, I chose you. And I chose you. And I chose you, and I want you, and I desire you, and any of you can follow me. On the front side, it doesn't cost you anything. On the back side, let me tell you, it's going to cost you everything, but you're chosen. Now, let me give you a scenario here, okay? Let me give you a scenario just to think about. as we process what it means to be chosen and to follow Jesus. Here's a scenario. Two people get into two cars and they're going to the same destination. One knows where they are going to. The other one is supposed to follow. Have you guys ever been in this situation before? Okay? Somebody knows where they're going and somebody else has to follow. You've probably been in the situation on both sides. You've probably been the person leading, right? And you've probably been the person following. I'm going to give you 1 minute to argue about this, but whose responsibility is it for them to get there? Do it now. Talk about it around your table. Have a conversation. Whose responsibility? 1 minute. All right, did you guys come up with some conclusive evidence? All right, you all resolve this problem? You're probably thinking it depends on whether you're leading or following, right? Okay, but whose responsibility is it to get to the place that you're going? Is it the person leading the way, is it their responsibility to slow down to make sure that you are with them, right? Or is it the person who is following his job to keep up? I've been in both situations, and it is infuriating whenever I'm leading and I'm looking back and the person is like miles behind, like they're never going to get to the place that we're supposed to be, right? But I've also been on the backside, right, where I'm following and that person's running a red light, and guess what? I'm running a red light, right? Because I don't know where I'm going, so I'm getting there, right? And the cop pulls me over, and I'm just going to tell him it's his fault because I was following that guy. So I've been there on many occasions, and probably you have as well. Okay, but let me clarify this for all of us. I'm going to resolve this problem for all of us, right? It is the responsibility of the person who's following to get to the place that the other person knows where they're going. Yeah, it's important that the person that's leading would check every once in a while and be considerate and be a good leader, doesn't leave us. They keep us in mind, which our Savior happens to be an incredible leader. But it's the responsibility of the person who's following to keep up, to keep impressed. Have you ever been following somebody and then you like all of a sudden just forget that you're following them and you're just driving aimlessly? Has that ever happened to you? Like sometimes it happens. I know it's happened to me before. It's like, oh crap, who am I supposed to follow, right? Jesus goes, guys, hey, I'm right here. You can follow me, but you got to keep up. Keep in step. Keep to where my dust is going to land on you. Second scenario. What if, hypothetically, your wife tells her brother who lives out of town but is in for a visit to follow you home because they don't know where they're going. But then she forgets to tell you, the husband, that your brother-in-law is supposed to be following you. And then she remembers to tell you after you're about halfway home that the brother is supposed to follow you. Hypothetically, whose fault is that? Thank you. That happened yesterday, and I apologize to my brother-in-law, Adam, who didn't know I didn't know you were supposed to be following me. Okay. All right, so here's the deal. When we talk about following Jesus, if we don't do a good job of following Jesus, we don't accomplish our mission. Our mission is to be a people gathered together like this and in homes and throughout the week, but be a people following Jesus what? To those not yet. To those that are not yet following Jesus. But we never get to those guys if we don't do a good job of following Jesus. And quite frankly, if we get to those guys and we're not doing a good job of following Jesus, then we're not doing a good job of teaching them how to follow Jesus, right? And so when it comes to following Jesus, it's our responsibility to stay right in step with the Spirit of God and the Son of God and the Father who is God so that we can know how to follow Him well, so that when we come into contact with and encounter those that are in our sphere of influence who are not yet following Jesus, the dust that has settled on us so well because we've been following Jesus so closely can now just easily pass on to them. And so what we're going to be doing is in the coming weeks, we're going to be taking a look more specifically what it looks like to follow Jesus here at Sunnyside, because this is what we know. Following Jesus is simple. It's not easy. The concept of being able to say, I'm going to just walk in step with Jesus. I'm just going to go where he goes. I'm going to see what he does and do what he does. Like, that's simple. It's a kind of an easy thing. I'm just going to go where he's at. But it's a lot more difficult. It's not necessarily easy as we process through that. And so what we're going to be doing over the next several weeks is we're going to be introducing you guys to what it looks like here at Sunnyside to follow Jesus. And we're going to put some teeth to this. We're going to give you all some specific rhythms to hold on to and some things to put into practice so that you might be able to better follow Jesus. So in the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make 2 asks of you over the next 6 weeks. Yes, at this church, we challenge people, we ask things of people because we think that the mission that God has given us is too important not to call you guys to a greater standard or to a higher level of connection, okay? Now, I know that not every one of you guys is where Jesus wants you to be on your journey, but you're where you are, and that's fine. But we want to give you all some direction on that. And so what we're going to ask of you is over the next 2 weeks, there's 2 specific things that I want you to do. Next 6 weeks, I'm sorry. There's 2 specific things I want you to do. First of all, I want to encourage you guys to get into a group. Many of us, we actually just came out of this 10-week Root It group, and it was an incredible thing. We had a wonderful celebration on Wednesday night of what God has done just in those 10 weeks. But over the next 6 weeks, we're laying some foundations of what it looks like to follow Jesus here at Sunnyside, and it's going to be really incredibly important and strategic for you to know what that looks like and to get a taste of that in the context of community. And so if you're not currently in a group, I want to encourage you to get into a group. We have a variety of groups that meet on different nights of the week, different days of the week, and so if you want to, you can go to the app and look up discipleship groups there. You can go to the website. You can go out here to the hub. We'll have some people out there that can help you get connected to a group. You can ask somebody else at your table, hey, are you in a group? And if you are, can I be a part of your group? And if they reject you, just know that Jesus has chosen you, okay? So we'll find you a different group. It's fine, all right? But we want to find a group for you to be able to connect over the next 6 weeks. It's a short-term deal where it's not a lifetime commitment, and so I want to ask that you would make that commitment because you're going to get a lot more out of this series and the conversation we're going to have if you're going to be doing it in the context of the group. Each one of those groups is going to be doing a curriculum through the sermon companion that's going to be actually following what we're talking about every Sunday morning. Now, in addition to that, we're going to ask each and every one of you to practice a rhythm of reading by doing D1 daily, okay? We learned this in the Root It stuff. We've been practicing some of these rhythms of daily devotions, being in the Word, being in proximity to God through His Word, and it's an incredible, important thing. And many of you guys already are doing this. It's great. But for those of you that aren't, I want to ask you to jump on. And for those of you that are, I'm going to ask that you would actually do something with us. You would jump on this journey alongside of us. As a matter of fact, on your tables, we have these bookmarks that are right here. We encourage people to do D1 as a study method. If you already have a study method, that's fine, but this study method I found to be incredibly helpful, well proven, and easily transferable. And so what we encourage people to do in D1, it's on these cards, but it's 1 chapter. We encourage you to read 1 chapter a day, 1 chapter of the Bible a day. And we actually have a track for you to be able to read. I'll share that with you here in a minute. Choose 1 verse to highlight. So highlight 1 verse. What's 1 thought that actually stands out to you out of all, that entire chapter? Just 1 thought. It could be an insight or it could be an inquiry that you have. Spend 1 moment in prayer with God. Lord, what do you want me to know about the thing that you just revealed? And what do you want me to do with that which you've given to me today? And the last thing is 1 person. Share it with 1 person. It could be a spouse, it could be a kid, it could be a neighbor, it could be a random person that just happens to ask a question that correlates to the very thing that you read that morning, because that's how God's Spirit moves sometimes, all right? And so we want to encourage you guys to do a chapter a day. And what we've done is we've given you kind of a 10-week, a 70-day challenge each day to be able to process through this. And the track that we encourage people to do is James, which is the brother of Jesus. What would you have to do to convince your own brother that you are the Son of God? Let's start right there, okay? Start with James, and then John, then Acts, and then Romans. And so if you can commit to doing this, we want to encourage you to do it. Commit to reading along with us. You can use this bookmark as a guide. Those of you all that have YouVersion, we also have an event created. We'll be sending it out to you guys. If you are on our mailing list, you'll get it today. But each week, there's an event that you could sign up for or click on the link, and it'll automatically take you to our reading track and our reading plan, because we want to get you in the rhythm of reading the Word so that you you can be in proximity to what Jesus has said already and communicated already and what he's trying to communicate to you. Now, if you're in a group or you're going to get into a group, this track won't start until the day after you meet. So if you meet typically on Wednesday, I would encourage you guys to actually start this track on Thursday. That way you have a full week of conversation to be able to have the following week. Your leaders can talk to you guys a little bit more about that. So 2 things that I'm asking over the next 6 weeks. I'm asking everyone to get into a group, and I'm asking everyone to do D1 daily. I know that's a big ask for a lot of you, but I guarantee that if you can commit to doing that over the next 6 weeks, you're going to end up with some dust on you. You're going to be in proximity to Jesus a little bit more. You're going to walk away smelling like his sheep, hearing his voice, knowing it better. Other people are going to start to look at you and they're going to say, I think you've been with Jesus a little bit more. Who you follow determines who you become. And we just happen to have somebody today who's decided to follow after Jesus and surrender their life to him. Her name's Madison, and I want you to watch her story.